purposes, like that. And all questions asked in the chat facility will be collated and answers provided via our recent events page. If we have time, we will ask Anthony the questions, or Anthony will answer the questions if he has time within the speaking. So branch overview. We have our new branch committee, most of you will be aware, and the new committee has met for the first time, and hopefully we are looking for your ideas. So please, any ideas, things you'd like to hear or talk about, then let us know, and we will make sure they're considered and try and organise it for you. We're going to be on Zoom until further notice, and when we do get to know when we will be back to any other way, we'll let you know as soon as we know. Our program over the next few months is culture and behaviour, which we're planning for the 29th of July, and then contractor management on the 26th of August. The feeling is we stick to the last Thursday in the month, then everybody knows when we're having our meetings and can join accordingly. So look out for your committee mailers and our posts on social media in order to register for the events. For CPD, IPD, PRI and changes to membership grades, it's unlikely that the planned grade changes will take effect before September and quite possibly after that. If we get any information about the changes and new processes before that, then we'll keep you posted, encourage you to keep updated and moving forward within the current system. So as I said, our new committee has had its first meeting with lots of encouraging work being planned for the branch, and keep your eyes out for updates via the committee mailers and our branch microsite. And as we said just now, the branch events are going to be continued at least for the rest of this year. But hopefully, once things start to get back to how they should be, we can actually have face-to-face or even a mix of the two. IOSH weekly webinars, let us know, and others through our dedicated email address and social media on behalf of you and what you found most valuable and what's needed. And can I encourage you to consider becoming a mentor? Let us know if you have any mentoring requirements through the IOSH mentoring program page, which is on the site now. So Anthony currently works for a government department and has carried out voluntary work for the Care Forum Wales since 2010, and in his spare time has operated as a health and safety consultancy since 2013. He's been chair of a housing association since September 2018. He's part of the HSE Research Ethics Committee as a lay member for around 7 years, and was appointed last November by Baroness Via, Minister for Roads, Buses and Places, to the Secretary of State for Transport's honorary medical advisory panel on driving and psychiatric disorders as a lay member. Worked in a variety of roles involving health and safety as a manager and advisor since 1985, and was trade union representative and safety representative for a number of years. Works in civil service, NHS, local authorities, housing, private and charity sectors. So welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
Anthony, if I stop sharing, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen now, please.
Yeah, great. Right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. On the basis that I don't know everybody's experience, either in safety roles or in terms of investigation, I've got quite a broad range of topics this afternoon, hopefully catering for somebody who's brand new to health and safety or brand new to health and safety investigation, right through to time served and experienced safety professionals as well. In doing a little bit of research to prepare for this afternoon to make sure I was able to give everybody a thoroughly good opportunity to perhaps learn some new skills, I've incorporated several different techniques that we're going to look at. Some of them you'll be familiar with, or most people will be familiar with, which is the Swiss cheese model. So I'll come to that in a moment. But on some of the slides where I will move a little bit more quickly than others, the presentation will be provided for you, and the questions and answers to a number of the areas are included on the slides as well. So without any further delay, why should we bother with incident investigation? This is taken from a report that the HSE produced in January this year and looks at the number of work-related musculoskeletal disorder cases right through to mesothelioma deaths. And what has this whole list of statistics got in common? Well, it's things that have caused people issues with their health, safety, or well-being whilst at work. So I'll just leave you for a moment to digest some of those figures. When you read those figures, it is surprising that since the Health and Safety at Work Act in 1974, that was sort of 47 years ago, we've still got quite a high level of injuries and ill health. And something I sort of learned about 20 years ago, I'd often focused on minor injuries in the workplace without really fully understanding the occupational health type issues. But when you look at 111 fatal injuries to workers in 2019-20, that is terrible. It's a terrible figure, and it's never really acceptable for anybody to lose their life at work. But then when you look at the number of people who die from lung disease each year, estimated to be linked to exposures at work, 12,000 versus 111. And we really need to make sure that we don't just focus on the incidents at work that lead to somebody having a cut finger. We need to look at exposures at work and investigating those and really getting to the root cause of exposures to try and bring that 12,000 figure down successfully. So when we look at accident, incident, near miss investigation, it's not just about an injury to somebody who's laying in front of you. We've got to think a little bit broader and wider than that and protect the whole workforce from all sorts of exposures, not just an accident. So here's 3 accidents that have happened in the last 20 odd years. Didcot, unfortunately, where people died in a demolition. Paddington, when people died in a rail crash. And Cardiff, some people might think police helicopter crashing onto a roof, is that the Glasgow one recently? No, this was actually Cardiff in 2000 when a police helicopter landed on a roof, and I don't think there were any fatalities there. But what is an accident? It's an unplanned, uncontrolled event that led to or could have led to injury to persons, damage to property, plant, equipment, or some other loss to the company or organisation. There will be lots and lots of different definitions, but that's one. Your own organization might develop your own definition, but that's a good start point if you're new to the industry and haven't yet developed one for your own safety policy. So what can go wrong with any investigation? Well, I look back, and Health and Safety Executive had produced an interesting report in 1999, and what they found was that there were a number of areas where investigations can go wrong. And often that's because people investigating have found someone to blame, or maybe because somebody said an individual was to blame for an incident or an accident, the investigation didn't start. Or it could be the answers were already known. Oh, well, you know why that happens, so we won't bother wasting time, effort, or energy in investigating. Where investigations had taken place, they often failed to get to underlying or root causes, and managers, supervisors, or colleagues may prejudge the outcome of an investigation based on either a person or a contractor's previous reported behaviour. So lots of organisations work with contractors. Sometimes there's a little bit of banter around a contractor. Well, we've worked with them and, oh, they're always doing that wrong. If you go with that attitude, they're always doing that wrong, you're not going to learn, because sometimes they might have just done something different this time that could mean next time there's even more serious consequences. So do we have an investigation or not? Well, when HSE looked even where there was an investigation, there was a failure then to implement or monitor implementation of the findings and recommendations from those investigations. And where they were recorded, findings were not always shared. So it's no good keeping the findings of an incident investigation to yourself if you've got business partners or other parts of your organization that would really benefit from sharing that learning. For those of you new to investigation, what should we do? What are the stages? What are the processes? Well, I covered this about 18 months ago for the branch in a presentation, and perhaps later in the year we'll revisit and do another incident investigation presentation for newer or less experienced investigators. But effectively, with any investigation, any incident, you need to deal with immediate risks. Don't want you going up and asking somebody with an arterial spurting wound, right, can you tell me how that happened? We need to get them treated, get them to a safe location, away from a source of danger, remove them to a place of safety. Once that's done, then you can start the investigation. But importantly, decide what level of investigation you want to have. Is it a minor incident with potentially insignificant consequences and you might not put a lot of effort into investigating? Or is it something that could have been far more serious? But even at that stage, don't prejudge. And if you find you haven't got enough resource when investigating because new evidence comes forward, speak to your management team, speak to your colleagues, get more input. Once you've investigated the event, record and analyze results and review the process. So what we're going to do is look very briefly at Rasmussen's SRK, or Skills, Rules and Knowledge model, Reason's Human Error Models and Management, HSG 48, but then what we're going to do, because I found it interesting in the research, is a little bit of going to look in detail at somebody called Dupont and his Dirty Dozen. If any of you are from the aircraft industry, you'll be familiar with Dupont's Dirty Dozen, and I'll explain that as we go through. So human factors, what is it? So HSE and HSG 48 come up with this model, which looks at individuals, organizations and job factors all linked to human factors. And if we look at the job, the individual and organization, we look at how they impact on people's health and safety related behavior. And then consider a little bit more in depth, the human factors causing accidents are those that contribute, which are directly attributable to the operator, the worker or personnel involved in an accident. Now that might not be people actually at the location at the time of the incident. It could be that somebody in maintenance or somebody in design had done something, made an error, even months before or years before, that contributed to the accident. So we look at the human factors, human failings. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, we're all subject to human failings. And we'll look at what those human failings can be when we come on to Dupont's Dirty Dozen shortly. So a little checklist for you when we're looking at factors that could impact on our investigations. Illogical design, so job factors, illogical design of equipment and instruments, constant disturbance and interruption, poor instructions, poorly maintained equipment, high workload, noisy and unpleasant working conditions. Now to that, I'll add my own personal hatred of open plan offices, because what I found is an open plan office can be a very noisy and unpleasant working condition. It can be very distracting. Now, maybe not so dangerous in an office environment, but it depends what you're doing. And if you make a mistake because you're constantly distracted in the open plan environment, the impact of the mistake you make at your desk, what significance could that have for somebody in a construction environment or an engineering environment where they may be facing daily hazards? So we then look at individual factors of the people involved. What are their skill and competence levels? Are they tired? Are they bored or disheartened? Do any of our staff have medical problems that can impact on how they perform at work? Something that's not often cited is risk perception, but think about it, because some people say riding a motorbike or climbing or paragliding is dangerous, but those who do it perhaps don't see the danger because they've got a better understanding, or they just don't perceive the risk in the same way that the rest of us do. So risk perception can be a problem when we think about how individuals react or interact with whatever's going on at work. Human factors often go beyond a willful violation. So somebody may not deliberately or willfully cause an incident or do something that causes an incident. They won't blatantly engage in risky behavior unless they're one of those people that don't perceive the risk. But they can include factors such as inattention, fatigue, and impairment from drugs or alcohol. And again, we'll look at those in a little bit with our Dirty Dozen. So what about organisation and management factors? Well, factors that can impact on the investigation are poor work planning, leading to high work pressure, lack of safety systems and responses, inadequate responses to previous incidents. And that is absolutely the biggie for organisations that don't properly investigate incidents to start with, because they'll just start piling up and you won't learn any lessons from the previous incidents. Is management open to debate and discussion, or is it just one-way communication? Have we got problems with coordination, problems with people either acknowledging or having responsibilities? And is there poor management of health and safety or a poor health and safety culture? So again, these are some of the things to think about when you're starting your investigation. I'll take you through Rasmussen's skills, rules and knowledge model. I don't know if any of you remember, we had the Hudson River plane landing. I watched in awe with that as the pilot landed that plane. It was incredible. Now, how do we come to land that plane safely in that sort of environment? Well, Rasmussen looked at, for any job, any decision-making process, you've got a decision being made based on three things. The skill, which then is identified as routine and automation. The rule, which is procedures, and the knowledge, which he deemed to be the highest level in any decision-making process. And the knowledge is when you're faced with a situation that you haven't been faced with before, how you bring your skill, how you follow your rules, and how you mix that up with your knowledge to take what could have been a tragic situation into a situation where you've coped and managed. So although there were certain rules for ditching or deciding to land in the river, the pilot had to consider all of the options, fully aware of any hazards and risks involved, but then consciously executing the decision to land. So having skill, following the rules, and having knowledge when not to follow the rules or follow the rules in a novel or an unknown situation can mean that you end up with a safe event that could have been an unsafe event. So having your pilot properly trained, having somebody who's got the rules to deal with problems as they're thrown to them, and having the knowledge about the plane, knowledge about emergencies, so many things that only come with experience perhaps, and continuous professional development. So we've got the pilot land safely in circumstances that other people may think couldn't have been done. So it's good that we've got a rule about following a process and a procedure to a safe ending, but there's an unfortunate but. Each level of skill, rule or knowledge are prone to error. So if somewhere along the line we haven't trained someone correctly, then a wrong action, a skill-based wrong action could be happening. If there's an out-to-date or old checklist, that could endanger the safest possible operation of the aircraft. So the rules, we've got to keep them up to date, and we've got to keep people trained up to date on what those rules are. And any missing items, even in the thought process, when the individual is analysing the risk, that could have led to a wrong decision on the knowledge-based level. So we've got to keep people trained. We've got to keep our checklists up to date. We've got to make sure that people are able to make properly knowledge-based decisions when they're faced with risks or hazards. So according to Rasmussen, our human decision-making can be split into 3 different levels, but each of those levels can be prone to error. So if you're investigating an incident, can you use Rasmussen's skills, rules and knowledge model? Can you check, was the individual properly trained? Were they following the correct set of rules for that piece of equipment? And as well as just having some routine skills, sort of being trained almost to go on autopilot, did they have the school? Did they have the skill? Did they have them? Were they following the right rules? Did they have the knowledge on how to apply it? And this was an argument I sort of looked at in the 1980s, 85, 86, when national vocational qualifications first came out. Some people were just training to give them the knowledge, but it's interpretation and use of that knowledge, which is the critical thing. It's no good just telling people how to do things. There is an element there about making sure that they don't just understand, but they can analyze and actually carry out the work. But despite all of those problems, as Rasmussen states, good pilot training is key to safe flying, since it will train in all levels. And that's key to keeping people safe at work. For the jobs that they're doing, good training should keep them safe in the work that they do. So that's one case study on skills, rules and knowledge. The next one I'm going to go through perhaps a little bit more quickly, which is the human error model with a person and system approach by somebody called Reason. And the person approach focuses on the errors of individuals. So when we look at an incident, are we looking at what the person did, looking at errors of the individual worker, blaming them for forgetfulness, inattention, or weakness? Whereas the system approach would concentrate on conditions under which individuals work, tries to build defenses to avert errors or mitigate their effects. So on the human error model, the person approach looks on the unsafe act, errors and procedural violations of people at the sharp end, for example, nurses, doctors, surgeons, anaesthetists and pharmacists and the like. It views these unsafe acts as arising primarily from mental processes such as forgetfulness, inattention, poor motivation, carelessness, negligence and recklessness. There are countermeasures to this, and that would include poster campaigns that appeal to people's sense of fear, writing yet another procedure, disciplinary measures, and followers of this approach tend to treat errors as moral issues, and they've led psychologists to call it a just world hypothesis. If you're interested in this in more detail, right at the end of the slide, for everything that I'm covering, I've put relevant links to current peer-reviewed papers and things that can help you. If you want to follow this model, it helps you go to a good source of reference material. When we look at the system approach of the human error model, the basic premise is the system approach is that humans are fallible and errors are only to be expected even in the best organizations. Errors are seen as consequences rather than causes, and they have their origins not so much in human nature as systemic factors. And this would include recurrent error traps in the workplace and the organizational processes that give rise to them. And the countermeasures to that would be the assumption that though we can't change the human condition, we can change the conditions under which we work. So that is where the idea of system defense comes into place. Hazardous technologies possess barriers and safeguards. And when an adverse event occurs, the important issue is not who blundered, but how and why the defenses failed. And cited in one of the papers was that this person approach remains the dominant tradition in medicine. So when we look at doctors making errors, it looks like they would go back to disciplinary measures, threat of litigation, etc., etc. Now, we've got within the systems approach active failures and latent conditions. And we've got high technology systems with alarms, physical barriers, and other systems rely on properly trained people such as surgeons. So this is where the Swiss cheese model comes in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I'll leave you to read that after the event. because I wanted to move us on quickly to the Dirty Dozen. So I'll leave that there just for a moment. So for any of you not familiar with this, it is widely cited in a lot of literature and maybe of interest for you to look at in your organization. Here are some accidents that HSE have cited where they look at consequences of an incident and the human contribution and other causes. And then for those of you who are not perhaps looking at disasters or an industry that might equate you with Clapham Junction, Piper Alpha or Texaco, I've put two in at the bottom, which I encountered working in care, where a care home resident died after a moving and handling accident, and another resident died after a care worker walked backwards into an open lift shaft. So there are some interesting bits for you to look at there. And if we take a look at the resident who died in a care home after a moving and handling incident, the immediate cause of the incident was a care worker lifting a sling hook off the hoist whilst the resident was in the sling. The sling then, strap of it dropped through her hands. The resident fell headfirst onto a metal leg, died of a depressed skull fracture. And the care worker just did not follow the correct procedure, even though she'd been identified as having training and had been competent when assessed following training. Lapse of error, poor human judgment. These are things that can come into play. So even when you've got a competent worker, sometimes they'll just do the most unusual things. So people can cause or contribute to accidents through a failure. People, as we've seen, they don't tend to make errors deliberately, but we may fail by the way our brain processes information through our training, through the design of equipment and procedures. And people can sometimes make disastrous decisions even when they're fully aware of the risks. So many companies have their own anecdotes about recovery from a potential incident through timely actions of individuals. And for many incidents or near misses, emergency planning and response, including appropriate training, can significantly improve rescue situations. So consequences of human failures in an incident can be immediate, and they can also be delayed. So an active failure is made by frontline people, drivers, control room staff, or machine operators. And if something goes wrong, it has an immediate impact on health and safety. If we look at more latent failures, and sometimes when you're investigating close to an incident, some of the fallout from that incident may not have even happened yet. But latent failures are typically failures in health and safety management systems, poor design of plant and equipment, ineffective training, inadequate supervision, uncertainty in roles and responsibilities, somebody thinking it was someone else's duty to carry out an activity. So when you investigate, if you investigate too soon or too narrowly, you're not going to get to the latent failures, but you might actually get most of the active failures. I'll skip a couple of slides. Human factors from HSE. So HSG 48 talks about 12 human factors, and Gordon Dupont's Air Canada Dirty Dozen also talks about 12. Surprisingly, there's only one clear overlap, and that's around knowledge. And also, if we take a wider look, Gordon Dupont's Air Canada model, I'll talk to you about in a moment, was designed in 1993 around the aircraft industry and aircraft maintenance. It's gone quite wide since then, and UK civil aviation use it as well, not just in maintenance, but for air traffic control. And they've actually devised 300 criteria for human factors. But what we're going to do is a compare and contrast effectively of the Dirty Dozen, which were the first ones around aircraft maintenance. So there may be added value in planning your investigations when you've got one to investigate by giving due consideration to a variety of the models we've just looked at. Honestly, for many years in investigation, I just got on with the job, and it was only after I was experienced, perhaps a couple of years experience, that I started to look directly at human factors. I inadvertently picked some up over the years in terms of identifying failings. But if you're new, or even if you're experienced but not experienced in investigation, using some of these models can give you some triggers, help you put together a line of questioning or investigation. They're certainly helpful as a checklist. So let's take a look at Gordon Dupont's Dirty Dozen. So the Dirty Dozen refers to 12 of the most common human error preconditions, or conditions that can act as precursors. And after today, what you might want to do is have a look following these Dirty Dozen, based on your own skills, knowledge, experience, maybe historical analysis of incidents in your organization. You might find your own Dirty Dozen, which can help you then when you're carrying out future investigations. So in each of the 12, we're going to look at some of the problems and some of the countermeasures. So whilst there's a problem that caused an incident, there's things we can do to prevent that incident occurring again, or prevent that Dirty Dozen factor from occurring again. And I'll explain that on the first slide that we go to now. So poor communication, we've all suffered from that over the years. Communication refers to both the transmitter and receiver, as well as the method of transmission. Transmitted instructions can be unclear or inaccessible. And what I'll do is really focus on the fact that 30% of a message, only 30% of a message that you tell somebody is understood and received properly. And this is an old adage. I mean, I'm 60 and remember it well. Some of our younger people attending today may not really have this on their radar. But I remember for many, many years being told, well, in the First World War, somebody said, you need to send us reinforcements. We're going to advance. And by the time that message was communicated to dozens of others, if you take a look at the photos on the top right, it was send us 3 shillings and 4pence, send us 3 and 4, send us 3 and 4pence, we'd go into a dance. Now, okay, it's a bit of a joke today, but imagine you're waiting for sort of 30,000 troops and you get 3 shillings and 4pence in an envelope. It's a bit of a problem. So we really need to make sure when we're communicating to people, we communicate effectively. And any of you who are manual handling instructors, or who've ever been injured in a moving and handling incident where there's a team lift, take a look at the drawing below, and we've got a surgeon there with obviously a patient dropped on the floor, one of the theatre operators holding a pair of unfortunate legs, and the surgeon saying, and that is why we lift on 3. Because the amount of times I've heard people say 1, 2, 3, lift, and then some personnel lift on the 3 and some lift on the lift. Explain to people beforehand exactly what the instruction is. So for lifting, it would be, we're going to say 1, 2, 3, lift, and I want you to lift on the word lift. Or it's going to be 1, 2, 3, lift on the 3. If you don't give that explicit instruction, not only have maybe they're not heard properly, but we haven't given them something proper to hear. We haven't given them the full instruction. So it's really important that to make sure messages get across. If it's a critical task, make sure it's writing. If it's a complex task, logbooks, worksheets, checklists, spoken or verbal messages need to be kept short. So that's the first of our Dirty Dozen, and hopefully that'll give you a flavour for the next 11. Distraction. Take a look at the top. Modern teenage youth, or even modern people in the workplace. The amount of people I see or have seen in the past, people distracted by texts, Facebook, Twitter, everything else, and going off task. That is important. In the care sector, people are not allowed their mobile phones on shift for 2 reasons. 1, so that no inadvertent photographs of vulnerable people can be taken, and 2, so that distracting messages are not taken away from patient care. Yet I walk around hospitals and see people, nurses, doctors on mobile phones. I can't honestly say if they were on their breaks, but something to think about. A very good scaffolding film produced a few years ago showed how a scaffold worker was using his mobile phone. He'd unloosened a scaffold pole that was being dismantled, had a phone call from his wife about the gearbox needing replacing, and then led backwards against the scaffold pole, which then gave way and he dropped 40, 50 feet. That was only a theatrical event for the film, but it does.
Keith, are you there?
I am. We seem to have lost Anthony.
This could be interesting. Hey.
I'm assuming he's dropped right out.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Sorry about that, everybody. We'll try and get Anthony back. Unfortunately, he might have lost his connection there, so just bear with us for a minute. Thankfully, we're all still connected. I thought for a second we'd all been locked out, but looks like Anthony's just dropped out for a second. Hopefully, he'll come back in. So just bear with us for a minute, if that's okay. Apologies for that, but technical things. Anthony's here now. Just bring him back in. Apologies for that. We'll just pause the record for a second.
So we had the distraction. If that happens in the workplace, then we've got a bit of a problem. So what can we do to reduce errors from distraction? If somebody is approaching you and you're in the middle of a critical task, don't respond to them. And if it can't be completed without hurrying, stop the task, mark where you're at, or lock it off as a reminder to yourself or anyone else who may come back and complete the work. Management have a role to play in reducing distractions placed on employees. And I know when I worked in housing, we had hundreds and hundreds of incidents where staff were being phoned when the managers knew that they were driving. And at the same time as we were trying to stop drivers from answering mobile phones, we had their managers in the office ringing them up with tasks. So that's something that needs to be considered as well. Are we causing our operators to have errors by doing things that we shouldn't be? One of the ways of managing this is health and social care nurses issue medication and they wear a do not disturb tabard to prevent the distraction and reduce incidents, which of course can be fatal. Under these circumstances, even with that, I've witnessed people interrupted in hospitals and care settings who are wearing those tabards, being interrupted by patients, visitors, and worse still by colleagues. So lack of resources, we see two issues here with somebody using someone's back as a workbench for a circular saw, and somebody else trying to put a sort of quarry vehicle's tyre, pumping it up with a hand pump. Not going to happen, but both could lead to serious incidents. So make sure that we've got our staff have got the right tool or equipment for the job. And if you're investigating an incident where somebody's been badly injured, make sure you find out what tools they were using. And for those that need servicing, such as hoists and lifts and cranes, were they correctly in service date? Stress, both acute and chronic. We're all in very busy workloads and working environments. We've had added COVID stresses. Some people trying to work from home don't operate as well in isolation as they might in a team event at work. But if people are working too many hours or got too much stress, take a break, you deserve it. Why do we think that stress needs investigating? Well, just look at the first slide I showed you. 0.8 million work-related stress, depression or anxiety cases, new or long-standing in 2019-20. So 800,000. So that's a lot. And if people are suffering with stress, depression or anxiety, that in turn can lead to accidents or incidents. Some may be fatigue, sleep, diet problems, some of which can be helped. In Wales, we've got the Wellbeing Through Work programme, for example. Other parts of the country, or Europe may have their own well-being operations. But if you identify through your investigation that somebody's got stress, if you're in an organization that's got an employee assistance program, try and support the individual to feel confident to approach that and get help. You can't always, if you're the investigating person and you're dealing with health and safety, you don't always have that capacity to support the individual further than just giving them the right signpost. And hopefully then line management will support them too. So complacency, I've worked here for 20 years, never made a mistake. That's great. But all too often, those people who've never made a mistake, they always feel self-satisfied. They tend to lose their awareness of potential dangers. The best way of looking at this is, whilst too much pressure and demand causes overstress and reduced performance, too little can result in boredom, complacency, and reduced performance. It's important when you conduct a simple routine and habitual task and when fatigued to maintain adequate or optimum levels of stress through different stimulation. Some stress is good for us. It's the way we operate. We need that little impetus to get us going. Always expect to find a fault, follow written instructions and adhering to procedures that increase vigilance, such as inspection, can provide suitable stimulus. But importantly, particularly in these days, think of your team. Mutual cross-referencing and checking can provide stimulus when fatigued. And if you've made a mistake because you're tired, perhaps one of your colleagues will pick that up, and between you, you can provide a better service and a safer service. Again, this one moves straight on to teamwork then. Many tasks are team affairs. No single person or organization can be responsible for the safe outcome of all tasks. But if one person isn't contributing, it can lead to unsafe outcomes. We've got to rely on our colleagues and often outside people as well to give us support. Teamwork consists of the many skills each team member will need and bring to show that they're competent. So we've got a list of things on the left here, some of the teamwork skills that are included. But a team's effectiveness can be improved through a selection of team members with a broad range of experience and skills. So when you're recruiting, think about that. Some incidents may need in-depth investigation of team competence and dynamics. So I had to investigate an attempted suicide about 10 years ago. And the manager had not listened to a worker's concerns, not met with him at a pre-arranged time, failed to take into account his worries and fears of his competence. That worker nearly died and took 18 months to rehabilitate back into work because the managers were just not team players in that set of circumstances. There's a buddy-buddy system in diving. There's a buddy-buddy system with harness checks. So we've got a buddy-buddy system there. Let's make sure we apply it to bigger and broader teams and other activities too. Pressure, we all feel under pressure. Sometimes we feel under pressure because we're pressured to meet a deadline, and that might interfere with the ability of us to complete tasks correctly. We should always think of our quality rather than quantity and not be driven to close a task off that's not been done properly. Let's take the right route. Some of us need to learn assertiveness skills. It's not about being aggressive, but it's about having the capability to say, stop, I'm not happy with this. You're trying to push me too quickly. I don't want a safety critical incident to occur. When you're investigating incidents, consider if the worker is under too much pressure. Were they afraid, or did they have the training or capability to say no, or even the strength to ask for support? Some people will see saying no as a threatening thing. Some people will see asking for support as something that shows they're weak. I think we need to get away from that and support people if they feel under pressure to perform a task that could lead to harm or an incident. Then we need to support people to become assertive and actually have that strength of character to say no. Then we move on to awareness. Sometimes we work in isolation. Maybe you're in a room full of people, but still working in isolation and only considering our own responsibilities. That can lead to a tunnel vision or a partial view and a lack of awareness that our actions can have a significant impact on others and the wider task. Such a lack of awareness may result from other human factors such as stress, fatigue, pressure, and distraction. It's important to build experience through our careers. especially concerning the roles and responsibilities of those we work with and in the wider team. Developing our foresight is essential in preempting the effects our actions may have on others. This is all about professionalism. Sometimes we're comfortable, we're in our comfort zone, we don't like to ask for help. Now, the most professional people I know are quite happy to ask others to check their work or give them a check-in on something, have a conversation with them about challenging what we've done or our decisions. Getting useful feedback from people with relevant experience and competence will improve our situation, will expand and improve our own experience and awareness too. Vigilance is closely related to situational awareness and workplace procedures, and two-way communication and the use of a checklist can help this. So some of the things to think about: following any incident, did the worker need help? Did they ask for it? Was it freely available? Had they asked for it in the past and it had been refused? Was it the norm for people in that team or that part of the organization to work in isolation? So just take a look at this poor dog here, somehow stuck on two stair rails, not sure where to go. Don't ask, but yes, I could use some help. For us, it's not often that we can look at somebody and say they need help. Occasionally, if they're struggling putting up a tent, for example, you know if somebody's struggling and you can step in and help. But very often, somebody who's working in isolation is problematic for us, and therefore we might not know. Actively encourage people to be self-aware and know when to ask for support and help. This one ties in strictly to what we all have to do with IOSH and other professional bodies, continuing professional development. Day one, we employ somebody who's got a qualification, has had some training, and they're suitable for the job on the day that they come with us. But how quickly, how fast do people lose their skills, knowledge, experience, and capability when they don't keep up with their CPD? And every one of you who's gone through the IOSH process for upgrade will know that CPD is critical. It's really important. Again, when you're investigating an incident, check that the people who are involved don't just tell you, well, I'm trained, I know how to do my job. Say, okay, well, what sort of training have you got? Let's take a look at your CPD, not just what you came to work with us. We don't just want the qualification you had 5 years ago. Let's see what you've done since. What have you learned since? That's really important. Fatigue, well, it's a natural reaction to prolonged physical or mental stress. A lot of people suffer from COVID fatigue. Back-to-back meetings is awful. 2-hour Zoom meetings can be difficult, or Teams or other things. So let's take a look at it properly. If you're going to get tired, take a look at how you can get away from that. Look at your diet, get some regular sleep, get some regular exercise. Seek medical advice or support of the health and well-being or well-being at work programs that Public Health Wales are running. Work of a critical and complex nature should not be programmed during what's deemed to be the low point on our circadian rhythm, usually 3 till 5. And if accidents happen then, we got a problem. So let's take a look. Should we have programmed the work for that time? Because that's the lowest level. What are the things you can pick up on your investigation? So post-incident, consider working hours, shift patterns, break between shifts. Very often, people haven't done what's legally required, which is a night worker risk assessment. Check that's been done and if it highlighted any issues. Lack of assertiveness, again, back to what we said early. Somebody will often go with the flow because it's easier than challenge. I really should say something, but I'm afraid to. If for any of you versed in management training, there's something called groupthink, often associated with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Everybody wanted to say yes on something because it was easier to say yes than challenge and stick out like a sore thumb. So learning assertiveness techniques, you teach that for your teams because that can allow workers to express their concerns about unsafe norms. Now, unsafe norms are what we look at next. Workplace practices develop over time through experience and often under the influence of a specific workplace culture. These practices can be good and bad, safe and unsafe, and they're the way we do things around here. And the way we do things around here often starts to fall outside safety guidelines. it doesn't always follow written rules or behaviours. And I'll just finish off, 2 more slides, finish off on this one. Wall collapses are all too frequent. There's a new build Edinburgh School at the bottom. There's a house that fell down on the BBC News a few weeks ago, the Gable End, and a wall there. Now, I investigated a wall collapse 10 years ago, 10 metre by 2 metre wall. The construction was faulty. There were no pillars, poor foundations, and it was rushed. When I interviewed the competent bricklayer, he said, well, I wouldn't have built it that way. It's just that my boss told me to build it just like the wall next door. So I did as I was instructed, not what I knew was correct. So even a competent worker will follow the norms or the way we do things around here and put the organisation and or people that come into contact with this work activities at risk. And I've just got 2 more slides. Thanks for your time, and I hope today's been of value to you. If you're new in setting up an accident incident system or you're concerned about investigations, I'm more than happy to take a call. You can contact me on LinkedIn or via the branch. If you're setting your new system up and don't even have an accident book, HSE has just published a near miss book. That came to me on an email link from HSE yesterday, and you can get an accident book, a near miss book there that will help you. The link is going to be provided on this slide. And then last but not least, as I said at the beginning, sources, references, and further reading. Everything I've tried to cover today is, apart from the information you've got on the slides, if you're really interested and from an academic perspective want to learn more, you can access any of these hyperlinks. So that's all from me. Thanks ever so much for your time, and I'll hand back now to Dylan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Questions? I've had a look through the chat, and amazingly, you've either answered all our questions in your presentation, Anthony, or you've completely baffled most of us because there isn't a single question that I'm seeing. Keith or Paul, have you had any?
I haven't seen any.
No, not from me.
Well, hopefully I've answered all your questions, because I absolutely love accident investigation, and one of the things we were looking for, what might be useful, is to get a straw poll now later in the year. If we've got time, what I'd like to do is run the accident investigation event from start that I did a year and a half ago for Branch, and I've spoken to Andy about it and Rian. So that's one of the options for us. So if any of you are new to accident investigation, what I'd really like to do is throw this out to you there. We can run this as an event on accident investigation, get into root causes and root cause analysis, and we could do that as an event later in the year if that's something as branch members or even guests that you'd like to see. Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to put your comments in the chat if you're interested in that. That would help her give us a guide. I must admit, one of the pictures I did love was your guy with the hand tyre pump stood by that big wheel.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much manual handling or strain there's likely to be for him trying to pump that up.
Yeah. So as I said, please feel free to get in touch with me through the branch or LinkedIn if you've got any questions after the event. More than happy to help you on a professional basis. This isn't I haven't got the capacity to take any work on, but I'm more than happy to help a colleague.
Yeah, and we will make sure that the presentation is available via the branch microsite in a few days' time following this. Just looking at the chat, it's certainly lit up, and I think the general consensus is people would love to see the in-depth root cause presentation later on in the year if possible.
Brilliant.
Keith, over to you.
Okay.
If I start sharing.
I was going to say, you got the slides. If you can bring them up, that would be good. So basically, thank you. Thank you to everyone for taking their time to attend today. Thanks to Anthony for sharing your knowledge and experience with us, and certainly for suggesting that you're willing to come back and do another presentation. That's brilliant. We're looking forward to welcoming you all our future meetings and moving forward with us as a branch. Please complete the short post-event survey, as your feedback is truly valued, and we do use it to utilise and shape future events. Please stay safe, stay well, and stay connected. Thank you.
Here's our links to our web, our email. Please feel free to email us any suggestions, as well as I believe there are some free text questions in the poll. And you can find us on LinkedIn. And again, the IOSH webinars and Zoom meetings link is there.